Contrary to the negative we have just been considering, let us now take the example of a positive that constitutes total adherence to the drama of the house besieged by storms. In Ohiboscos Maliqua, the house is called La Hustus. It is built on an island in the Camargue region, not far from the great Han River. It is a humble house, and appears to lack resistance. We shall see what fortitude is possessed. The author takes many pages to prepare us for the storm that is brewing. A poetic weather forecast goes to the very source of whence the sound and the movement are to come. With what art, to begin with, he achieves absolute silence. The immensity of these silent stretches of space. There is nothing like silence to suggest a sense of unlimited space. Sounds lend color to space, and confer a sort of sound body upon it. But absence of sound leaves it quite pure, and in the silence we are seized with the sensation of something vast and deep and boundless. It took complete hold of me, and for several moments I was overwhelmed by the grandeur of this shadowy piece. It asserted itself like a person. This piece had a body. It was caught up in the night, made of night, a real motionless body. In this vast prose poem we come upon messages that contain the same progression of sound and fear as it is to be found in certain stanzas of Victor Hugo's La Dijeune. Only here the author takes the time to show the narrowing of the space, at the center of which the house is to live like an anguished heart. A kind of cosmic anguish precedes the storm. When the wind starts to howl at the top of its lungs, soon the entire menagerie of the hurricane lifts its voice. If one had the leisure to analyze the dynamics of storms, what a bestiary of the wind could be found not only in these pages, but throughout Bosco's work. For this author knows instinctively that all aggression, whether it come from man or from the world, is of animal origin. However subtle, however indirect, hidden or contrived a human act of aggression may be, it reveals an origin that is unredeemed. In the tiniest of hatred there is a little live animal filament, and the poet psychologist, or the psychologist poet, if such a one exists, cannot go wrong in marking the different types of aggression with an animal cry. It is also a terrible trait of man that they should be incapable of understanding the forces of the universe intuitively, otherwise than in terms of a psychology of wrath. And faced with this pack, which gradually breaks loose, the house becomes the real being of a pure humanity which defends itself without ever being responsible for an attack. La Huse in man's resistance, it is human virtue, man's grandeur. Here is the passage that describes the house's human resistance at the height of the storm. The house was fighting gallantly. At first it gave voice to its complaint. The most awful gusts were attacking it from every side at once, with evident hatred and such howls of rage that at times I trembled with fear, but it stood firm. From the very beginning of the storm, snarling wind had been taking the root to task, trying to pull it off, to break its back, tear it into shreds, suck it off. But it only hunched over further and clung to the old rafters. Then other wind, rushing along close to the ground, charged against the wall. Everything swayed under the shock of this blow, but the flexible house stood up to the beast. No doubt it was holding firmly to the soil of the island by means of the unbreakable roots by which its thin walls of rot-coated reeds and planks drew their supernatural strength. Though the shatterers and doors were insulted, though huge threats were proffered, and there were loud bogling in the chimney, it was of no avail. The already human being in whom I had sought shelter for my body yielded nothing to the storm. The house clung close to me, like a she-wolf, and at times I could smell her odor penetrating maternally to my very heart. That night she was very really my mother. She was all I had to keep and sustain me. We were alone. Discussing maternity in my book, I quoted the following magnificent lines by Malzahl, in which the mother image and the house image are united. I say mother, and my thoughts are of you, O house, house of the lovely dark summers of my childhood. Melancholy. It was imperative to find a similar image to express the deep gratitude of the inhabitant of La Houdeuse. Here, however, the image does not come from a nostalgia for childhood, but is given its actuality of protection. Here, too, in addition of community of affection, there is community of forces, the concentrated courage and resistance of both house and man. And what an image of concentrated being we are given with this house that clings to its inhabitant and becomes the cell of a body, with its walls close together. The refuge shrinks in size, and with its protective qualities increased, it grows outwardly stronger. From having been a refuge, it has become a redoubt. The thatched cottage becomes a fortified castle for their recluse, who must learn to conquer fear within its walls. Such a dwelling has an educative value, for in this passage of Bosco's book there is a sort of dovetailing of the reserves of strength with the inner fortresses of courage. In a house that become for the imagination the very heart of a cyclone, we have to go beyond the mere impression of consolation that we should feel in any shelter. We have to participate in the dramatic cosmic event sustained by the combatant house. But the real drama of Maliqua is an ordeal by solitude. The inhabitant of La Houdeuse must dominate solitude in a house on an island where there is no village. He must attain to the dignity of solitude that had been achieved by one of his ancestors, who had become a man of solitude as a result of a deep tragedy in his life. He must live alone in a cosmos which is not that of his childhood. This man, who comes of gentle, happy people, must cultivate courage in order to confront a world that is harsh, indigent, and cold. The isolated house furnishes him with strong images, that is, with counsel of resistance. And so, faced with the bestial hostility of the storm and the hurricane, the house's virtue of protection and resistance are transposed into human virtues. The house acquires the physical and moral energy of a human body. It braces itself to receive the downpour. It girds its loins. When forced to do so, it bends with the blast, confident that it will right itself again in time, while continuing to deny any temporary defeats. Such a house as this invites mankind to heroism of cosmic proportions. It is an instrument with which to confront the cosmos, and the metaphysical systems according to which man is cast into the world. Might meditate concretely upon the house that is cast into the hurricane, defying the anger of heaven itself. Come what may, the house help us to say, I will be an inhabitant of the world, in spite of the world. The problem is not only one of being, it is also a problem of energy, and consequently of counter-energy. In this dynamic rivalry between house and universe, we are far removed from any reference to simple geometrical forms. The house that has been experienced is not an inert box. Inhabited space transcends geometrical space. But can this transposition of the being of a house into human value be considered as an activity of metaphor? Isn't this merely a matter of linguistic imagery? As metaphor, a literary critic would certainly find them exaggerated. On the other hand, a positivist psychologist would immediately reduce this language to the psychological reality of the fear felt by a man immure to his solitude, far from all human assistance. But phenomenology of the imagination cannot be content with a reduction which would make the image of subordinate means of expression. It demands, on the contrary, that images be lived directly, that they be taken as sudden events in life. When the images is new, the world is new, and in reading applied to life, all passivity disappear if we try to become aware of the creative acts of the poet expressing the world. A world become accessible to our daydreaming. In Bosco's Meliqua, the world influences solitary man more than the characters are able to do. Indeed, if the many prose poems the book contained were to be deleted, all that remained would be the story of a legacy, and a duel between the notary and the heir. But much is to be gained for a psychologist of the imagination if to social he adds cosmic reading. He comes to realize that the cosmos molds mankind, that it can transform a man of the hill into a man of island and rivers, and that the house remodels man. With the house that has been experienced by a poet, we come to a delicate point in anthropo-cosmology. The house, then, really is an instrument of typal analysis. It is even an efficacious instrument for the very reason that it is hard to use. In short, discussion of our thesis takes place on ground that is unfavorable to us. For in point of fact, a house is first and foremost a geometrical object, one which we are tempted to analyze rationally. Its prime reality is visible and tangible, made of well-hewn solids and well-fitted framework. It is dominated by straight lines, the plumb line having marked it with its discipline and balance. A geometrical object of this kind ought to resist metaphors that welcome the human body and the human soul. But transposition to the human plane takes place immediately, whenever a house is considered a space for cheer and intimacy, space that is supposed to condemn and defend intimacy. Independent of all rationality, the dream world beckons. And as I read and reread Meliqua, to quote Pierre Jean Riouf, I hear the iron hoofs of dream on the roof of La Côte de Housse. But the complex of reality and dream is never definitely resolved. The house itself, when it starts to live humanly, does not lose all its objectivity. We shall therefore have to examine more closely how houses of the past appear in dream geometry, for these are the houses in which we are going to recapture the intimacy of the past in our day dreams. We shall have to apply ourselves increasingly to studying how, by means of the house, the warm substance of intimacy resume its form, the same form that it had when it enclosed original warmth. And the old house, I feel its russet warmth, comes from the senses to the mind.